Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with the much anticipated Q&A series, which today we will be continuing with the Greenskins, or the Orcs and Goblins. So, before we get into this, we're going to be trying something a little bit different. I got a ton of Greenskin questions. I have over 40 pages of single space written answers for Greenskins. I mean, there is a ton of questions, and I answered all of them. I answered every single question. But to try and keep some sanity about this, what I've decided to do is break all of the questions up into like relevant topics. So A, we're not repeating questions, and B, when you watch a video, you kind of know what the subject matter is of all the questions. So like today's video is going to feature like on the physical attributes of greenskins. So like their physiology and their age and how they grow and stuff like that. So every video's title will be like Greenskin Q&A, episode blank, and the subject matter. So if you are looking for a particular set of topics, you can find it really easy. So there'll be like an episode on the differences between 40k orcs and fantasy orcs. Or there'll be an episode on how do orcs feel about other races. Do orcs, and there might be one that's like, are orcs good as mercenaries? You know, if there's enough questions. But today's topic is going to be physiology. I don't want to waste too much time, so let's go ahead and get into it. Hopefully we'll get through all the physiology questions in one video, and if not, it'll, you know, they'll still be roughly 30 minutes. That way we keep things understandable. So let's get into it. Our first question today comes from Erik the Red, who asks, what is the life journey of a greenskin, all the way from a measly fungus spore to a full-fledged orc? So the way greenskins work is that greenskins, when they die and when they defecate, essentially leave spores all over the place. And in the right environments, it has to usually be like some kind of cave or dark. It can't just be out exposed in the open. It needs to be it has to have some form of cover, so it's not purely exposed to the elements. And the soil's nutrients determine a lot about what's going to come out of what I call birth shrooms. They don't have like an official name, but they're basically these fairly sized mushrooms that grow out of the ground from where a greenskin spore was laid. And when they're fully ripe, they will basically birth a greenskin into the earth, where their roots go down to. And once the greenskin is fully developed, it will crawl up out of the soil, and they come up in batches. Typically, there's like a certain amount of time it takes, and they come up in groups. And some greenskin places, like, have a certain place where this happens from, like they actively breed, you could say, but a lot of places it's just random. And what determines the type of greenskin that comes out is basically the environment. So whatever greenskin dies there, that can have an influence on the type of greenskin that comes out. So like if you have a ton of goblins, more than likely you're going to get goblins. But it's not impossible to get a different kind of greenskin species from the one that died or the one that left the spores in the first place. Because typically, the more nutrients you have, the bigger the life form born from that shroom is going to be. So if you don't have a lot of nutrients, or it's like really bad environment for greenskins to grow in, then you're going to get snotlings. After snotlings, if it's a little bit better than that, you'll get what are called essentially runts, which runts are pretty small goblins. That's actually what Skarsnik started as, is he was originally a runt, though he was pretty unique for a runt because he was really, really smart. But you'll get like small goblins, and then from there you'll get squigs, and then after squigs you can get bigger goblins. So typically your smaller goblins are going to become night goblins. Larger goblins will either become common goblins or forest goblins, depending on the environment. And then past that, you'll start getting your orcs. So you'll get your common orcs. Common and savage orc aren't different species. They're more like different cultures. And then once you get past orcs, you'll get like your biggins and stuff. Though greenskins, of course, do grow during their life, so they can like change categories of like runt to biggin, but they won't change species. So like a goblin cannot turn into an orc. Once they're born, that determines their species. Squigs are a little bit complicated because squigs are technically a greenskin species in that they produce the same way, but squigs have a slightly different life cycle, and squigs are born in very similar spaces to greenskins. It's not very well stated if the mushrooms that create greenskins can also create squigs, or if what they meant when they talk about it was that squigs and greenskins always produce in the same space because they're basically they're cousin species. It's not super duper clear. I'm pretty sure what they meant to say was that squigs, which are a subspecies of greenskin, you won't have orcs die and their spores will evolve into squigs. That's not going to happen. It seems that squigs create squigs. But goblins and orcs create, their kinds of greenskins. But that's kind of the gist of how you determine what kind of greenskin you're going to get. And then from there, they grow up. So you'll go from a spore to a birth shroom to a runt, which runts are freshly born greenskins. And if the runt survives, which is not super likely for most of them, but there are usually so many of them that even with a high mortality rate, it's fine. Runts become what are known as little uns, which are of course smaller than average of whatever their subspecies is. And then you go from little uns to full size, so you'll go from like a little un to a goblin or a night goblin or an orc or what have you. And then from there, if they continue to excel and do really well, they'll become biggins. And if biggins continue to do really well, they just get bigger until they become a war boss or something like that. Black orcs are a completely unique species as well. So the subspecies that you'll see birthed are snotlings, goblins, orcs, black orcs. Those are like the big 4 subspecies. Night goblins, regular goblins, and forest goblins are all more cultural differences. There's very little physical differences between them. Night goblins on average tend to be smaller, but that's due to their environment having a lot less nutrients, and they tend to spend time like in little caves and stuff, whereas like regular goblins tend to be leaner and taller. But once again, that's a production of their environment. That's not like programmed into them from the way they're born. So those are the 4 main species, and then of course you have squigs, which are like close and very similar, but not exactly the same. So hopefully that answers that question. And once they're biggins, they just get bigger. So our next question comes in from -28, who has 3 small questions. Do giants reproduce like humans or some other special way? Do forest goblins live exclusively in the forests of the Empire? Can they be found in other places? And are gnoblars true greenskins like goblins, orcs, and snotlings, and that they, do their life cycle and all that stuff? Okay, so from what evidence we have, giants produce just like humans, in that there are male giants and female giants. Granted, they suffer from a very, very small gene pool that has led to a ton of inbreeding, which is not great for them. It's why they've gotten so much smaller over time. And this is a direct result of that the Sky Titans had like a kingdom, but it was of course just wiped out by the ogres when they came west. As for the forest goblins can be found in any wooded domain on the planet. So, except for in Lustria. Not Lustria, Ulthuan. So, if, like, the jungles of Lustria and the jungles of the Southlands, tons of forest goblins. The cold forest of Nagaroth, forest goblins. The forests along the southern coast of the Darklands, forest goblins. Like, they are literally anywhere you will find enough trees, you're gonna find forest goblins most of the time. And of that, like, some of the most dangerous tribes are in the Southlands, because the Southlands, of course, is where Mount Arachnos is, and Mount Arachnos has is like the capital of the forest goblin culture, with the exception of the Black Pit. Both of them are like super important locations for forest goblins because they have like the biggest spiders. As for gnoblars, they are true greenskins in a physical sense. They are a unique subspecies, kind of like how black orcs are a subspecies of orc. Gnoblars and hobgoblins both are subspecies of goblins. So, just like hobgoblins, gnoblars live very far to the east, but where hobgoblins live in the northern, hobgoblins live in what we call the eastern steeps, which are east of the mountains of Morn. So they're like way the hell over there. And a lot of them spawn in the mountains of Morn, in the northern reaches and in the northern darklands. Gnoblars spawn in the southern darklands. They come from a place basically called Gnoblar country. It's kind of like foothills, and it's basically the hills that lead up to the mountains of Morn from the west. So like that, it's kind of like it's pretty gross area, but it leads to the ocean south of the Darklands, and there are jungles just south of it, or I guess they might not be jungles, but forests just south of it, and that's kind of where their main spawning regions are. But unlike goblins, so the thing about gnoblars is physically they are greenskins, but culturally they're very different. They are like purely scavengers, and they're pretty stupid. They're not intelligent creatures, but they flourish really, really well as servants under the protection of the ogres, because the ogres basically found them to be useful for tasks that ogres either don't want to do or are really bad at. You know, like running errands, or being able to get into tight spaces, or like being assistants to like the ogre butchers, you know, when they're preparing meals, or being scouts, or being lookout gnoblars, where they like sit on an ogre's shoulder and they like look out for incoming cannonballs and stuff. So so physically, yes, they're greenskins. Just like if you took a gnoblar and put him in a perfect environment where he could constantly be fighting and winning, he would get bigger, just like regular greenskins would. But that doesn't really happen because they're really, really stupid, and they're very, very diminutive even compared to regular goblins. As for their worship, from what we can tell, gnoblars worship the Great Maw, but it's kind of unclear because they are literally so dumb that it's difficult to tell if they even have the concept of worshiping, or if they just kind of do whatever they have to do to live. Like when it comes to goblins, so not including snotlings because that's a separate species, but when it comes to just goblins, gnoblars are the dumbest. Like they are the bottom of the food chain, which is why they rely on the ogres, because everyone else picks on them. All right, our next question comes in from Lazy Captain Rex, who asks us, what is the average lifespan of greenskins from goblins to black orcs, and who is the smartest orc to ever live? So, man, the average lifespan for a greenskin is like, that is impossible to answer, because orcs and goblins seem to be immortal so long as they can flourish in a constant violent environment. However, being drawn to violent environments naturally means that they have really, really short lives on average. Like, most greenskins are really lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look on it, to live past like a decade or 2 decades, just because they're so... everything in their culture revolves around violence and constant fighting, whether it's fighting each other or fighting an enemy. And because of that, most greenskins just don't live that long. We've never really seen greenskins die of old age. Like that's not a thing that happens in their culture. So I don't really, I can't really think of like even a year to throw a ball, throw a dart at, because like it's never happened before. There's never been a greenskin who's died peacefully in his sleep, because he got too old. But that being said, they can get old. Like Scarsnake was starting to kind of feel his age when he was like well over 100, but he was only starting to feel it, and it was only because it was literally the end of the world, and he was getting like depressed, because Gobla had died at that point. So like, I think if he had just been like doing well, I don't think he would have even been bothered how old he was. Grimgor is ancient, but the only breed of greenskin that might die of old age are snotlings, just because they're like literally so tiny. But once again, snotlings like get stepped on casually, and most greenskins either don't notice them or kind of keep them as pets, and they still can live for surprisingly long periods of time. So I don't know. Like the oldest greenskins tend to be shamans, because shamans will usually avoid the front line. And so as long as they don't accidentally miscast and make their own heads explode, which happens fairly frequently, they can live to pretty astronomical ages. But even then, it's almost impossible to tell, because like night goblin shamans have a concept of age, but the way they think about age is like you get to the point where you turn into a shaman shroom. But that is an accident. That doesn't happen as a natural progression. That happens because you ate too many shrooms, and one of them goes bad or backfires, and you turn into a shroom. So I don't know what to say. It's a total toss up. When it comes to the smartest orc, the smartest orc is easily Gorbad Ironclaw. Gorbad was, as far as orcs are concerned, Gorbad was a genius. He was a really, really clever war boss, and is probably the most successful war boss who's ever lived. I mean, Grom's definitely up there, but I would say Gorbad was probably a little better at Grom when it came to tactics. Grom had some other advantages going for him, but Gorbad was A, huge and really strong, but B, he knew how to control greenskins, and he was for an orc, a brilliant tactician, and because of that, he was unstoppable. Like, he raised Aberheim and Nuln to the ground. Like, he busted two of the best Imperial cities at that time, and only at the walls of Altdorf was he stopped. And it's because, like, leading into the war for the siege of Altdorf, he got stabbed in the chest with a rune fang, which just made him angry. Like, he gets impaled with one of the most powerful magic artifacts in the Empire, and he just, like, grabs the arm of the dude who stabbed him, just rips it off. But, like, Gorbad was insane, and he was super duper clever. He wasn't as strong as Grimgor, but he was almost as strong, and he was a lot more mobile because he rode on his piggy. Snagla, I think was its name. But I will say that Azhag had moments where he was the smartest orc, but that wasn't because Azhag was smart. It's because Nagash was in his the crown of sorcery was on his head that has Nagash's consciousness in it, or at least a part of Nagash in it. And when he would take over, Azhag would just be Nagash. So he was like as smart as Nagash was, but that wasn't really Azhag. So I don't really consider that a fair take. So I would say the smartest orc, Gorbad Ironclaw. Moving on. So we got Mark Morph here who says, hi, we already answered that. So Mark Morph, got your question, already answered it. Poor Manatee 6197 asks, how are gnoblars and hobgoblins affected by Waaagh energy when greenskins launch a big Waaagh? Could gnoblars start their own Waaagh? So if there was a really big Waaagh, and the hobgoblins and gnoblars were allowed to join, yes, they would feel it and they would add to it. However, no greenskin would be caught dead allowing either of those guys to join them, because gnoblars are sniveling little rats that greenskins will just stomp, and they're less than useless. As far as the greenskins are concerned, they're not as cute as snotlings, and they're way more useless than a goblin. So they're just there to get killed. And hobgoblins are like the most grotesque little backstabbers. Like, no greenskin would ever trust a hobgoblin. It is programmed into their DNA that they know hobgoblins are backstabbing jerks. And any greenskin that was left alone with a hobgoblin would, like, beat them to death without any, like, even a hint of hesitancy. Even the most nasty, two-timing night goblin would, like, be, like, not trust a hobgoblin. He'd be like, that guy that guy is something ugly. Like, screw that guy. Could gnoblars start a Waaagh? No, they're way too dumb. They're way too weak and they're way too dumb. They can never get a Waaagh going. Unless it was like, unless the world got Thanos snapped and the only thing left was like halflings and gnoblars, then maybe. But you know, Tommy Bravo asks, is there anything higher than like higher up the food chain than a black orc, or is the black orc the biggest and baddest you can get? And can goblins evolve in a similar manner to orcs? And then how did orcs / goblins start taming wyverns? Thanks for the question, Tommy Bravo, and thank you for everyone who's asked questions so far. So, black orcs are the biggest and baddest orcs, but they are not common orcs. Like, they're a different species. Because black orcs were genetically engineered. They were designed by the Chaos Dwarves of Tsar Nagrund to be the biggest, baddest orcs. And unfortunately for the Chaos Dwarves, they were a complete success. So, no orc can get bigger and badder than them. On average. I will say there are select orcs like Gorfang Rockgut who are larger than a fair amount of black orcs. But, like, Grimgor is the biggest orc. Period. Goblins, just like orcs, can get larger and stronger due to continued success and violence, absolutely. But due to the size they start at, it's not nearly as dramatic. So, like, Scarsnake is a really good example of this. If you ever read his book, he starts off as a runt, and he goes all the way up to being, like, one of the biggest goblins. Like, he's not nearly as big as, like, Grom or anything, but Scarsnake's fairly tall. And it's because over the course of his, like, 100-year life, 100-year plus-ish, I think he calls himself, like, 80 in the end times, but the math doesn't work out. He's at least 100. But, Scarsnake has gotten notably larger across his life, but since he started at such a small size, like, yeah, he's gotten a lot larger, but he's still not as big as an orc, if that makes sense. Like, he's a little bit smaller. But, you know, if a goblin was allowed to just keep going and going and going and going, sure, they could get orc-sized. I mean, Grom was huge, even though he cheated by eating a troll. But, physically, yes, they can grow to larger sizes. But it would take, it would take centuries for a goblin to be, like, huge. And then the wyvern question. So this is actually a really good question. Unfortunately, the Greenskins are really bad about keeping stories or records. In fact, they just don't. They tell stories. And the first successful wyvern rider is not a story that's been passed down, though I imagine it was probably a very violent, if not outright comical, series of events. As for how it's done in the modern day, it actually entirely revolves around night goblins. So, night goblins specialize in the breeding and raising of most creatures that Greenskins use, and that includes wyverns. So, like, wyverns, squigs, even some trolls are, like, specially taken care of by night goblins. And so what night goblins do with wyverns is these sneaky little gobbos basically keep track of the wyvern nests and, like, the mating grounds. And what they will do is once the wyvern lays eggs, they will send in the bravest or stupidest night goblins to try and steal as many eggs as possible. And once they do this, they take the eggs and they will usually sell them off to the highest bidder. And you have to at least be with one very special exception that we'll get into in a later video. There has been only orcs are, like, strong and brutish enough to overwhelm a wyvern's own stubborn will and, like, be their riders. So the night goblins will sell the wyvern eggs or very young wyverns to an orc war boss. So, like, Azhag, his wyvern Skullmuncha, he got that from the Red Eye Night Goblin tribe. They gave it to him as a gift, though Skullmuncha was almost full grown. But Azhag's story is, like, kind of unique because even though Skullmuncha was basically full grown when he got her, because of the Crown of Sorcery and the fact that Azhag was, like, when it came to willpower, Azhag was like insane when it came to willpower. He was able to, like, immediately cow Skullmuncha just by looking at her. But usually it's a little bit more of a bumpy road than that. And nobody trusts a wyvern, even their riders. Never trust a wyvern. But a fair amount of orcs, like, are very fond of their mounts and, like, spoil them by, you know, feeding them what, you know, whoever in their camp they like the least or whatever. But wyverns can make fairly nasty loyal mounts to certain orcs, but you should never turn your back on one. But hopefully that answers that question. Brandon Perez says, do orcs experience emotions like fear, love, or hate? So, not really. They don't experience complex emotions, at least very, very rarely. Fear and hatred are rife, but those are like basic survival instinct kind of emotions. You know, they don't experience things like love or depression most of the time. There are examples of greenskins experiencing fondness. Like, it's really, really common for bosses and war bosses to have, like, a favorite snotling, because maybe that snotling has, like, a particular gimmick that's really funny to them, or, like, there's something about it they just really like. So they will treat the snotling basically like a pet. And if you, like, you killed their favorite snotling, they would be genuinely upset with you. Like, they would probably kill you, but they'd forget about it after, like, you know, a few days at most. If not a few hours. The only, like, legit case of depression that's been documented among greenskins, and, like, so, like, there was, like, a full-on, like, genuine relationship that was really old, and when it was severed caused horrible depression, was when Goblin died during the end times. So, because Skarsnik was always with Goblin. Like, Goblin was chained to Skarsnik's body, so they were always together. And after like a good at least 80 years of being the warlord of Eight Peaks or something like that, he was old. But Gobla died finally, and Skarsnik got really, really depressed. Like, he just gave up on a lot of stuff, and that was basically the end. That was basically the end of Skarsnik's story. Like, he kind of didn't want to fight anymore after that. Which, that's really unheard of for a greenskin. But we'll talk about that more when we do Skarsnik's lore video. Brian LeBlanc asks, hello, Sotek, I have 4 questions about the boys. If all the boys in the world joined into one big mega Waaagh, would they be able to destroy all the other races, including Chaos? How do the boys make a Squig Gaba? Is it just a female squig that shoots babies? What happened to Grom the Paunch during the end times? And this is off topic, but do you think CA would make a complete, accurate size map for Total War Warhammer 3? Okay, so this one I'm wrapping up because of the second part of that question. But real quick, so if all of the greenskins in the world somehow magically got connected and made one big Waaagh, everyone else would be screwed, because with that much Waaagh energy, I am 99% sure that Gork and Mork would physically manifest onto the planet, and it would be a beatdown. Everyone would get just annihilated. Even Chaos would not stand a chance against that. That would be the beatdown of the millennia. It would be ugly. And although hilarious, no, Squig Gabas are not female squigs that shoot babies at people. Squig Gabas are a very specific species of squig, or subspecies. They're very large, and what they're really famous for is that they're the most gluttonous of squigs, so they like to eat like nobody's business. So what goblins do to turn them into weapons is a Squig Gaba, which is Gobba for anyone curious. They're chained in place, so they wrap chains around him and like put stakes in the ground so he can't move. And they're force-fed a bunch of smaller squigs that they want to eat. But the night goblins coat the smaller squigs in this like acidic, noxious liquid that prevents the Squig Gaba from swallowing them. So it's like a chemical mixture that they're lathered in, and it makes it like really disgusting to the Squig Gaba. And once the creature's mouth is basically just packed full of these smaller squigs, the night goblins will like allow it and give it and aim it, and like the squig on top of it tries to help it aim, and it will start spitting the squigs out, which turns it into like a siege weapon. And these squigs, because they have been forced into this creature's mouth, are like super jazzed up and are super angry. So they're like these super pissed off squigs. They get fired across the battlefield, and when they land, they just start like ripping into everything around them. So they're basically these really nasty projectiles. Alternatively, what sometimes happens is that the squig gaba, despite the mixture, just doesn't give a crap and will swallow the squigs anyway. And when that happens, those chemicals, if they hit the squig gaba's stomach acid, which is really, really strong, it actually will mix into a really fiery explosive, and the squig gaba will instantly just explode in like just a giant fireball due to the chemical mixture, and it will incinerate anybody standing in the vicinity. So like all the night goblins and the little squigs, like everybody dies. So it's a very dangerous weapon. As for Grom the Paunch, he never showed up in the end times. There was a White Dwarf magazine a long time ago, not a super long time ago, but like a fairly long time ago, that told a story saying that Eltharion the Grim like led a campaign to the Badlands, tracked down Grom and killed him. But I'm not sure if that's canon in 8th edition. I don't think it is. There are a lot of Greenskin legends about Grom still being alive. I mean, more than likely he'd be dead because he never came up. But, you know, it's kind of one of those big mysteries. It's the same thing for Gorbad Ironclaw. Like, Gorbad should not have been able to escape the situation he ended up in, but it's not said for sure if he's dead or not. For whatever reason, whoever wrote the Greenskin stories really did not like giving them, like, final deaths. Like, the only one that we see documented get killed is Azhag. But, you know, there you go. As for the final question, even though it's a bit off topic, I do think the Total War Warhammer 3 Mortal Empires map will be as large as it can be, with the consideration that the end turn times cannot last for eternity. Like, although I know a lot of people want it to full scale, myself included, like that would be really cool, the end turn times would be atrocious. So I don't think the Total War Warhammer 3 map is going to be like to scale globally. I think it'll be like the Total War Warhammer 2 map that we already have for Mortal Empires with more tacked on. Alright, next we've got... Oh, we're out of time. Alright, guys, so thank you for watching. Oh, gosh. So we got like halfway through the, like, the physiology and, like, you know, kind of questions. So this will be the first part. Hope you guys all enjoy it. We will be back. We're going to be hitting these every day for a while. The only days you probably won't see a Q&A video is like maybe Saturday and Sunday. I might do something different for those days. But Monday through Friday for like the next 2 to 4 weeks, at least, we're going to be hitting Greenskin Q&A. So hope you all enjoyed watching. I hate you all for asking so many questions. Just kidding. But see you guys tomorrow. Bye.